So what happens when your boss isn't a person, but an algorithm? Sounds like something out of a movie, right? Well, it's not. It's happening right now. Today, on The Explainer, we're going to pull back the curtain on the quiet but massive rise of AI in the boardroom. Let's kick things off with this prediction. Back in 2015, the World Economic Forum said, hey, by 2026, an AI will be on a corporate board. Sounds pretty forward-thinking, right? The thing is, they were actually late to the party. The revolution had already begun.
Yeah, that future they were talking about for 2026, it was already here. Take a look. A full year before that big prediction, back in 2014, a venture firm in Hong Kong literally put an AI named Vital on its board. Then, just a couple of years later, a publicly traded company did the same thing. Now, you could argue these were just symbolic moves, but they weren't just for show. These were the first real signs that the all-human boardroom was starting to change.
So how is all this really playing out? Well, that's what we're diving into today. We'll start with how AI is already making its way into the boardroom. Then we'll get into the legal stuff, the robot rulebook. We'll also check out the two main ways companies are automating things, tackle the big black box problem, and wrap up by looking at what this all means for our future.
All right, first up, AI joins the boardroom. You see all the flashy headlines about AI directors, but the real story is actually a lot quieter. It's a silent revolution happening right under our noses, where algorithms are starting to make those big C-suite decisions.
Okay, but as AI steps into these massive roles, it hits a wall, a legal wall. See, most corporate law was written with actual people in mind. So, can an AI even legally be a director? Let's get into the robot rulebook.
You'd think this is a totally new problem for lawyers, but people were actually thinking about this way back in the 70s. This professor, Meir Dan Cohen, came up with the idea of a personless corporation, a whole company run by computers. And his thinking was pretty simple. If it can run a business successfully, why should the law care if it's a person or a program?
So that idea from the 70s has now turned into what we call an algorithmic entity. And get this, according to legal experts, under the laws we already have in places like Delaware, you could probably create an AI-managed company today. No new legislation needed. The door's kind of already open.
And this all points to the ultimate goal, what's being called the fused board. This isn't just about one AI director sitting next to a bunch of humans. No, this is about one single super powerful AI being the entire board. The idea is it could make decisions that are faster, better, and more rational than any group of people ever could.
A really great way to wrap your head around this whole thing is to think of it as a self-driving company. It's just like a self-driving car. The end goal is total automation, where the company just navigates the market, makes all the strategic moves, and runs itself without a human needing to touch the wheel.
So, okay, the law might just let this happen, but how would you actually build one of these things? On the tech side of it, companies are basically going down two completely different roads to get to this automated future.
And it really comes down to these two strategies. On one hand, you've got the all-in-one brain approach, where you build one central AI to see and control everything. On the other hand, you've got the specialist team approach, where you build a whole bunch of different AIs that each become an expert in one specific executive job.
If you want a real-world example of that all-in-one brain, look no further than the Panorama Command Center at the oil giant ADNOC. It's wild. It pulls in real-time data from across their entire $60 billion operation, uses these digital twins, basically virtual copies of their real-world assets, to run simulations, and even uses blockchain to keep everything secure. It's basically a digital nervous system for the whole company.
Now, the other path is all about building that team of specialists. Think of AIs like Salesforce's Einstein, which can sit on meetings and give you data-backed advice in real time. But it gets way deeper than that. We're talking about AIs that automate complex financial decisions, AIs that help pick new human board members, and even AIs that manage relations with shareholders. It's like a slow and steady takeover, one executive function at a time.
But here's the thing. As these AIs get more and more powerful, whether they're a single brain or a whole team, we run smack into the biggest challenge of all, trust. I mean, if we can't understand why an AI made a certain decision, can we really just hand over the keys? It's time to talk about opening the AI black box.
At the end of the day, any AI director has to be held to the exact same standards as a human one. First, it has to be fair and unbiased. That's non-discrimination. Second, we have to be able to look under the hood and see how it thinks. That's transparency. And third, when it screws up, and it will, someone has to be held responsible. That's accountability.
To make sure we get that transparency,
Regulators are starting to write new rules. The European Union is really leading the way here with what they call the right to explanation. It's a pretty powerful idea that could legally force companies to show their work and explain how their algorithms came to a decision.
But, and this is a huge but, we have a fundamental problem. There's this trade-off between how well an AI performs and how well we can understand it. Often the most powerful, most accurate AI models are also the most complex and opaque. So we're kind of forced to choose. Do we want the absolute best results, or do we want to be able to explain how we got them?
And this isn't just some academic debate. Look at the COMPAS algorithm, which was used in the US court system. It was accused of having a racial bias in predicting who would reoffend. But when people demanded to see the code to check it, the company that made it said no, claiming it was a trade secret. That is the black box problem, right there in the real world, where the need for accountability runs headfirst into corporate secrecy.
So we've got the law, we've got the tech, and we've got these huge ethical problems. But what happens when you put it all together? What does this automated future of ours really look like? Is it a takeover?
Look at this number, 7,800. What's that? Well, that's how many jobs in places like HR, that IBM announced it expects to replace with AI. This isn't some far-off possibility anymore. This is a clear-cut plan from one of the biggest tech companies on the planet.
And this trend is part of a much bigger, almost sci-fi idea called the technological singularity. It's the theory that at some point AI will get so smart that it can start improving itself. And once that happens, you get this runaway intelligence explosion, and technological progress becomes so fast and so profound that it's basically unstoppable and completely impossible for us to predict.
So let's say an AI director makes a decision that bankrupts a company. Who gets sued? Who goes to jail? You can't put an algorithm on trial. The legal model that's starting to emerge is called producer responsibility. Basically, the blame travels up the supply chain, not to the AI, but to the humans who made it, sold it, or were operating it. At the end of the day, a person is still on the hook.
And that leaves us with the one massive question that's probably going to define this century. As we build these incredibly powerful, autonomous systems to run our companies and maybe even our economies, are we just building a better tool that we will learn to manage? Or are we, in fact, building our own managers? The question isn't if AI is coming to the boardroom anymore. It's what happens to the rest of us when it takes a seat.